and Jim. Lee, I cannot tell you how many times I have serenaded our dogs in the morning with that song.
Yeah, and most people don't know the story behind it. They think it's
No.
just like all positivity, but it comes from somewhere.
It does, as everything does.
As it does.
As it does, yeah. So I want to do this talk a little, not that much different, really. I'm just going to start with a quote instead of a story, and then I'll kind of go into that because I've been kind of pondering this quote all week. It's from J.R. Tolkien. Imagine that, and he says this. He says, "We have come from God, and inevitably, the myths woven by us, though they contain error, will also reflect a splintered fragment of the true light. We come from God, and inevitably, the myths woven by us, though they contain certain errors, and goodness goes they do, will also reflect a splintered fragment of the true light, that dynamic force, that beingness, that intelligence that lives in and through and as all things, that thing that knows us by our name, loves us unrelentingly, and is always present to us. And we are a storytelling species. And sometimes the best way to convey a truth is not necessarily in some kind of linear, academic, theological, philosophical, scientific way. Yeah, they will give us knowledge, but sometimes it's the myths and the legends and the stories and the songs and the art that we do. Because really, from the soul's perspective, the soul is not rational, but it is, as I said, it's erotic, it's feeling, it's desiring, it's got this juiciness to it. And though the mind may think through reason, the soul thinks through intuition, and how it communicates is through art. And so the stories, the myths, the art, this is how we connect to these deeper kinds of things. And whether that be, the story, the story of Gilgamesh and his journey and his trying to understand, or on the fields of Kurukshetra with Arjuna and Krishna, or the many stories within the Hebrew and the Christian Bible, or the myths and legends that we have read, or the stories that we have heard, or of course, the Lord of the Rings, as Frodo and Sam are having this incredible conversation as they are walking through the depths of Mordor. All of those stories, in some way or another, become our stories because we relate to them, because we resonate with these conditions. This thing that we were at on Friday, one of the things that Reverend Dr. Christian was saying is, what we understand is, for thousands of years, we have been grappling with some of the very same important questions. And we find perspective of this. We find healing or insight from one thing or another. Before service, Jim and I were talking about this, and we were talking about how after the First World War, the devastation that war created, truly it did. An entire generation of men were lost. And yet we have some incredible writers, Thomas Mann, what's his name? I was just talking about him. Not Hemingway, but Hemingway, Thomas Mann, Hemingway. I was thinking of, he wrote Siddhartha. What is it? Herman Hesse, thank you. Guy, when all else fails, look at your notes. And, some of these great writers that came, Tolkien, all these guys coming from then. And then we were talking, because he was saying, hey, have you seen the making of Led Zeppelin? And I've seen about the first quarter of the movie, and then I fell asleep. But how do you fall asleep with Led Zeppelin, right? But, it's a longer story than I want to get into here at church. But what that talks about is after the Second World War in Europe, there was this flourishing of music, of jazz, and of the blues. And partly because there was this exodus of so many artists from our country going to Europe because of the racism they were experiencing, And so what we saw was this entire blossoming of music and things that were there. And in all of these things, we grow and we evolve and we expand. And we do it collectively as a species, as a race, as a tribe, as a family. But we also do it individually. And, and I think for me, one of the most important things about literature, and whatever one you want, it doesn't matter. But what they do is they expand our imagination. And really the way that we begin to manifest, the way that we begin to create, the way that we begin to grow is always so contingent on our imagination. And as I have said probably 1,000 times, our imagination, its ability to conceive and expand is predicated on our perception. And if our perception has been limited or stulted or in some way, brought small, then our imagination will be that too. And so, it's always about how we are inspired, how we grow, how we expand. Ralph Waldo Emerson says it this way. He says, "The mind once stretched by a new idea never returns to its original dimensions." The mind once stretched by a new idea never returns to its original dimensions. And so if we grow, if we expand, if we engage in a new idea, we're never the same. And that's the beauty of it. That's the goodness of it. And so we should always be endeavoring to do this. Emma Curtis Hopkins has this really interesting concept. Emma Curtis Hopkins was one of the early teachers of New Thought, one of the movers. In fact, so many of our great leaders in our particular teaching studied under her. But she has this really interesting idea. She talks about how when we will set an intention, and we'll do visionary work, we'll do prayer work, we'll do the things that we need to do for a dream that is coming, and then what seems to happen is just the opposite. So like we're praying for this experience of love, and the next thing you know, our partner leaves us. We pray for a great experience of prosperity in our life, and we get fired. We pray for an experience of health, and we have a sickness. And you wonder, it's like, what's going on? Why is this? And what she talks about, and what I think is kind of an interesting thing to contemplate, is often the infrastructure of our life does not fit the dimension of our dream. And so we would never achieve the love we desired if we remained in that same relationship. We would never experience the prosperity we hoped for if we stayed in that job. We would never take our health seriously if it wasn't for that incident. Whatever the case may be, always and always and always, as the imagination expands, it creates and rebuilds an infrastructure to contain the dream that is wanting to come through us for the benefit of all beings. Jesus says it interestingly too. He talks about how you can't put new wine into an old wineskin because as people know, wine ferments and it creates gas and things like this. And without getting into the physics of it, if you put new wine in an old wineskin, he says what will happen is it'll burst. Or maybe more able to understand, he says you can't put a new piece of fabric on an old garment because it will stretch and it'll pull and it'll destroy the garment. So sometimes, just thinking, hey, I know, I'll just slap this idea on, I'll just do this thing, without doing the deep inner work of it, we're simply replicating the same issues over and over again. So maybe sometimes part of the experience of growth and expansion often appears the exact opposite. And sometimes when we experience that, instead of going into the, oh, waily, 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 oh my God, the world's gonna end, maybe something else is happening and it's inviting us to pay attention to what is going on there. I got this text this week. It was really an interesting text. It's somebody running for a political office, and I won't get into all the particulars of all that because that's just not appropriate here. But in the text, the person said, help me ruin my opponent. And I thought to myself, I don't want to help you ruin anybody. Maybe I'm not sure now if I want to even help you defeat this person, if that's kind of where you're going to go. But maybe as we look at the world today, and this idea of conquering or vengeance or getting back, maybe that infrastructure, that whole way of looking of a tit for a tat kind of thing, maybe even that whole system does not create what we're wanting for the world that we're all dreaming of. And there's this really interesting story in the Hebrew Bible. It's toward the end of the book of Genesis. And in that there's a young man by the name of Joseph. And Joseph was one of Jacob's sons. And it was his beloved son. It was his youngest son, or his second to youngest son, and his beloved son. You know, Joseph of the many-colored garment, or technicolored garment, or whatever it's called. So anyway, Joseph has these dreams because he's sort of psychic and he can interpret dreams, and he has these dreams. And he shares these dreams with his brother, and the brothers are like, oh man, this guy is. And he's their favorite, and they're threatened, and they're nervous about how the whole thing is going to come down when his father goes, and who's going to get what, and where's it going to go. And they enter into a conspiracy. First, they think they're going to murder him, and then they thought, well, we really can't kill him. But they sell him into slavery. And Joseph finds himself sold into slavery in the land of Egypt. And there's several adventures that happen there. The household in which he's in, the wife accuses him of something he didn't do. He ends up in jail. Somehow or another, he is interpreting dreams. The next thing you know, he's brought before Pharaoh, and he interprets these dreams that Pharaoh has, and he's lifted up. And the next thing you know, over a long period of time, of course, the next thing you know, Joseph is now the grand vizier. He's like second in command under Pharaoh, and he has saved the Egyptian from famine. And he is this high established place. And because there's a famine in the land, his brothers come to Egypt because they're hungry. Their flocks are starving, and one thing or another. They think Joseph's dead. And they're bargaining with this person. And Joseph reveals himself to them as their brother. Now, if anybody had a right for vengeance, it's Joseph. If anybody's going to do a see I told you so, it's Joseph. And Joseph has the upper hand. His brothers are terrified that they find themselves, they're even willing to give up their freedom and become slaves just to save their families. And Joseph responds this way. He says, I'm your brother Joseph, the one who you sold to Egypt. Now don't be upset and don't be angry with yourselves that you sold me here. Actually, God sent me before you to save lives. We've already had 2 years of famine in the land, and there are 5 years left without planting or harvesting. God sent me before you to make sure you'd survive and to rescue your lives to this amazing way. You didn't send me here. It was God who made me a father to Pharaoh, master of his entire household, and the ruler of the whole land of Egypt. So let's consider this, what he's saying. He's not just being magnanimous, but what he's saying is, you think you have done something, but in fact, there's a greater intelligence at work, and what looked like you sending me into slavery was actually God sending me ahead to protect and take care of you in the future. Not only is this about forgiveness, this is about a whole other way of thinking. Not only is it, forgive your enemies, but in a certain way, it is desiring their good. So sit with that, because that's a big stretch of the imagination, is that not? To actually think about the person who may have betrayed you, and then to think, this in some way, what is happening to me from this betrayal is going to be in the end for their good. Can we even wrap our mind around that concept? Because the invitation is, we're wanting to create a certain world. We're wanting to create a certain way of life. We're wanting to create a certain way of consciousness, and yet we think we can create those things from an old paradigm. But what these myths and legends are saying is maybe the whole structure is off. And maybe there's another way of doing it. You know, and I invite you right now just to kind of think for a moment, is there something that is going on in your life right now? Somebody or some situation that you can look at them and say to yourself, there is an intelligence that is available to me for their good. For their good. Not reparations, not whatever, but for their good. Can we think in that form of radical thinking? There's a book that I'm reading right now, and it's really kind of changing my life in many ways. But he talks about it, and I'm always hesitant to give like 5 steps to this or 4 steps to that or 3 of these or 9 of those. But he encourages us as a way of resistance to the experience of the world as we see it. 4 P's: people, place, prayer, and past. Steve or Mike, one of you hit the AC? Because maybe it's a little warm in here. Just check and see if it's there, because I'm seeing other people. So 4 C's. I mean, 4 P's, not C's. That's another talk. 4 P's. The first one is people. Is to focus in, because in many ways, the challenge that we're in this world is this idea that the way that we benefit the world is to expand. That we need more of this and bigger this and more of this and bigger this. And maybe it's not about expanding, but contracting. Maybe it's not about go big or go home. Maybe it's about go home and go small. So the 4 P's, the first one is, these are our priorities. The first one is the people around us, the immediate people around us. Because it's really easy to think in terms of globally, and yes, we should at some level think globally, but where yours and mine today and tomorrow, our attention is literally around the people that are with us today. The ones we know, the ones that we love, the ones that we're working through, whatever we're working through. So our first thing is to think intimately of those whom we love and receive love from. And the second thing is to love where we are. To love where we are. Because one of the things, against this machine that Tolkien talked about and all this other kind of stuff, this whole idea of being global citizens, is it means that there's no home. And home as a human being is so essential, to have a place that we can call home. This is where I belong. These are where my roots are. This is where I am nourished and I feed and I give back to the land that immediately surrounds me. And prayer. Prayer is that way that we connect to the transcendent. Prayer is that way that we shift. And something that Ernest Holmes, one of the founder of our particular denomination, used to say is, he says, prayer doesn't change God. And I don't know about that one. I'm willing to have a conversation about that. But I'll go with the second part where he says, prayer doesn't change God, it changes us. That part I get. When we pray, something happens to us. People know that when, when Jesus says, pray for your enemies, something really powerful happens, because as we pray for those who persecute us, all of a sudden, they're no longer persecuting us. Not because they're magically doing anything, but because our way of looking at those things shifts and changes. And then the past. There's a richness in tradition. There's a richness in the wisdom that is brought down to us. It's not so much about this new way of being things, but what can we learn from the wisdom that is there? We are, as we understand it, the sum of all of our experiences. So we should honor those. We should recognize those, not try to obliterate them or forget them, but incorporate them into our life. So it is the people, the places, the prayers, and the past that help us integrate to prepare ourselves to create this new infrastructure of this world that we're wanting to be. And I want to offer you a tool today, if I may. And it comes from Louise Hay. Everybody know who anybody know who Louise Hay is? God bless Louise Hay, man, right? You can heal your life. She was a character. I've actually had the opportunity to meet her a couple times. She used to sneak into the back of the center of that I started with my friend Kevin. Louise Hay is this really interesting New Thought teacher. And she has a really interesting perspective on things. And she has gone through, her story is one of those begins like a horror novel and ends like, a fantasy. But she talks about this affirmation that she uses all the time. Or she did. She's somewhere else these days. But she says this. She says, whenever anything is going on, this is what she says. All is well. Everything is working out for my highest good. Out of this situation, only good will come. I am safe. Now, I want to be really clear that, I'm not sure that I would, somebody in Gaza, just say this prayer and everything's going to work out. Because there's other laws that are at work, right? We can't just say that there's a one-size-fits-all. But boy, howdy, this is worth a try personally for each and everybody in this room. For the situations that are in this room, all is well, everything is working out for my highest good. Out of this situation, only good will come. I am safe. And she says, if we begin to repeat this over and over, what it does, it creates the space for the universe to start working in our favor. Because, the bottom line is this, is if, something that Voltaire says, is he says, the longer we dwell on our misfortunes, the greater the power they have to harm us. The more we dwell on our misfortunes, the greater their power to harm us. So instead of dwelling on these situations as misfortunes, one of the things that we know is prayer and worry are the same activity of mind. As Ralph Waldo Emerson says, prayer is the contemplation of the facts of life from the highest point of view. And what is worry? It's the contemplation of the facts of life from the worst case scenario. They're the same mental activity. And as a conscious person, we can choose the direction that our mind works. We can choose to worry, oh my goodness gracious, what more can happen from this? How is this going to go? Blah, 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 blah. Or what good can come from this? So I invite you to repeat these words quietly to yourself. All is well. Everything is working out for my highest good. Out of this situation, only good will come. I am safe. All is well. Everything is working out for my highest good. Out of this situation, only good can come. I am safe. What would happen if you take the situations that you're in today and applied this contemplation? How would things shift? How does that create the space for a good a dream, a vision to make itself manifest in our life today. Thank you very much.
Since we're talking about using the imagination,